Welcome to the SPS Digital Learning Hour.
Brought to you by the Digital Learning and Assessment Department.
We're coming to you from a conference room in Central Office, bringing you the latest news in the Springfield Public Schools in regards to technology, along with inspiring interviews from teachers who are using technology in the classroom.
We'll also inform you of the latest updates, practices, and news as it pertains to our district. Whether you are new to using technology in the classroom or are a seasoned vet, we are here to help.
Thanks for joining us today. I'm your host, Mike Thomas.
I'm Suzanne Zargis.
In case you missed it, we're coming up to the last couple weeks of school. If you've missed any blog posts or podcasts, please go back and listen to them. This week's blog is all about what ISTE is. If you're not sure what ISTE is, it's an international group of technology teachers who get together and share ideas and thoughts and ways to integrate technology into all aspects of school. They have a lot of great resources, many of which you can access through their website.
That's it for In Case You Missed It. Coming up next, Hot Take.
So this is the final week of our three-part series on podcasts in the classroom. So if you are really interested in learning more, there are a lot of great resources that we've included in the show notes. We hope that you've gained a lot out of it. I know that we all have a deeper understanding of what podcasts are and how they can be used in the classroom. Plus, I think we all have a few new podcasts that we're looking forward to listening to. So take a listen, and when we come back, it'll be our interview of the week.
There's a lot of great information out there on how to do podcasts, and this New York Times article, I didn't print it out. It's just a very long scroll for me, but Suzanne, it looks like there's 10 pages to it,
right,
with images?
Right, it goes into detail about every part of a sample lesson you could use. So the elements of storytelling, activity for telling the story, podcast and interviewing. So you can have a warm-up with 1-minute interviews, then there's a mini lesson. It goes into the elements of an interview. If people are so lucky to have a smartphone, you could use your smartphone to record the interview. Then the editing process, again, something that could be a big black hole and seem really complicated, but they tell you how easy it is.
Yeah, and they really only focus on just a few of the editing tools that are kind of like the big important ones. That would be your being able to cut the audio. There's one, I think that they mention it, which is the noise reduction, where you're taking out the extra background noise. There's one for amplifying, which if you talk too quietly, we have to amplify your voice.
All right, I'll speak
Suzanne,
louder.
Looking at you.
Need a microphone on a microphone.
Suzanne would have been the best teacher I could have ever asked for at a young age.
So they really only focus on just a few of the vast number of editing tools that are there. I think there's something like 50 different tools that you can use, but they kind of only focus on the most important ones, which helps you because then as a teacher, you don't have to be an expert in all of the tools. You just need to know which ones are the important ones.
Exactly. And the last section of this, Mike, talks about planning your podcast, the producing of it. So definitely having the outline, as you mentioned earlier, of exactly what you're going to say, all the transitions that you need throughout, putting it all together. And finally, can't forget this, the podcast celebration. So when your students are all done, you can celebrate what they've accomplished. You could have a podcast listening party, or you could invite parents and guests. If time is short, you can let groups of students listen to each other's podcasts using headphones. Definitely an opportunity for students to hear feedback on their podcast and improve and make more.
The next part that we're going to look at is a whole bunch of podcast suggestions out there for either teachers to listen to help them grow in their practice of being an awesome teacher, or help students learn and grow. Or some of them are just kind of fun.
The podcast that I'm drawn to, as I said earlier, once you start listening to a variety of podcasts, you'll find that there are some you want to listen to and some that you want to bypass. So for me, the length of time and the voice are what influence my decisions on those two. I have a long commute, so sometimes it's very easy for me to listen to an hour-long podcast. If I did not have a long commute, there's no way I would listen to an hour-long podcast. So the 10-Minute Teacher podcast is one that jumped out at me. This is Vicki Davis, the Cool Cat Teacher. She has an amazing podcast called 10-Minute Teacher, which is a sequel to her old show called Every Classroom Matters. She chats with today's educators, thought leaders, and classroom teachers. And she actually has new shows appear 5 days a week and takes up to 10 minutes of your time, which is different from most podcasts. There's a new episode weekly. So I thought this was a great way to have a short podcast, but consistent episodes. There is another one I remember from a past podcast that we did, Mike, that was 10 minutes long. Mm-hmm. I don't have that in front of me, but we'll find the episode. Then there's 2-Minute Teacher Tips. In this podcast, Alice, I don't know how to pronounce her last name. I'll say Kunchi, maybe, is drawing on 10 years of classroom experience, current research, and feedback from fellow teachers. And she shares 2-minute tips to help teachers navigate the challenges not mentioned in teacher school. So again, something quick and easy to listen to when you've got 5 minutes to spare.
Mm-hmm. And a couple for me that jump out right away, and maybe you'll mention them too at some point, is Star Talk with Neil deGrasse Tyson, which is all about science and space. Think like Cosmos, that show series from Carl Sagan, but updated with more scientific information, but in podcast form. Another one is Malcolm Gladwell has one. It's like the Revisionist History. I'm going to look right now. Pretty sure it's called Revisionist History, where he goes back and he takes a look at different things in history and seeing if there's anything that we missed or anything that we could, what signs we should have been looking for so we could do something differently if it was a bad event. One that's this particular site, which all these sites are going to be linked where all of these podcast listicles are. One that he actually mentions, the author of this article, was have the students, this in particular for high school, listen to this 3-part series on college. So this was back in season 1, episodes 4 through 6, that you can turn around and have classroom discussions about. And apparently, I haven't listened to them, but apparently they're pretty good. I mean, there's also like This American Life, which is very popular.
There were a couple other ones I listened to. One was The Cult of Pedagogy, and I was all excited to listen to this one. But unfortunately, I'll say the positives first. So this is a very enthusiastic teacher who has gone to great lengths to create an ed tech guide for teachers that she spends a lot of time on, which I'll probably try and find at some point, and maybe we'll have another podcast on that. However, her style of speaking on her podcast is very low-key, quiet, slow, and not monotone, but very, very...
Gonna put you to sleep.
Yes. So I did not listen to a complete podcast that she created, just not my style. Maybe on a different day when I had more time, I'd be more apt to listen to hers. But she had great topics for her podcasts. I just didn't have the time to listen to them. Another one I listened to was New Teacher Talk with Pablo and Wes. And completely other end of the spectrum. So 2 guys that are cracking jokes and having a great time, but also giving new teachers some tips. The one I happened to listen to had to do with classroom management. So depending on your energy level, the type of speaker you like to listen to, and the topics you like to listen to, you will definitely find one that's right for you.
So in preparation for this, Suzanne, I did come across those 2-minute teacher tips that you were talking about, and that's right in my wheelhouse. I don't really enjoy listening to hour-long podcasts too often, with the exception of ours, of course.
We've gotten better. It's a little bit longer than a half hour now.
We're improving.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, right? So we've taken that feedback. And I have listened to Neil deGrasse Tyson as well. I mean, he really just... Cosmic podcasts are really cool to listen to. Cosmic anything is really cool to listen to, of course. But the 2-minute teacher tips are just perfect, quick hitters, as our supervisor would say, to just kind of provide refreshers as to what you need to know for podcasting.
There's also the TED Radio Hour, which is basically TED Talks, which is great to always listen to. There's the Stuff You Should Know, which is always a very interesting podcast. But again, it's in like that half hour to an hour range. So I understand if you guys haven't listened to it, but I tend to like the hour-long ones. Like probably my favorite podcast actually is nothing to do with education. It's the West Wing Weekly, where they go through episode by episode talking about the West Wing. So
yeah, I mean, I've read of that one. Is that who promotes it? Robert Costa?
Joshua Molina. So he joined. He was Will Bailey in season 4, and one of his friends that he made, who actually has another one called Song Exploder, which is a great podcast where they talk to musicians about where a song came from, and then they play the song afterwards. So those are my two favorites. And granted, they're not necessarily education, but they are a lot of fun to listen to.
And I think that's perfect, right? I try to listen to the 60 Minutes podcast to try to catch up on news stories. So there was a 60 Minutes piece on, I'm trying to think of the name of it, Elizabeth Holmes, who started Theramos, the company that just went belly up. It just, listening to these programs are so much more soothing and more comfortable for me than having to watch on TV and dedicate that time for on demand. Being able to catch that while I'm kind of, working on something or just driving is so much more beneficial.
Right. I'm so glad you said that, Brendan, because one of the other articles stated that exact point, that the reason podcasts are so popular is that people can listen to them while they're doing other things. So whether you're driving or doing some other rote task, you can learn something. You can listen to something that's interesting to you, which is why students love them too. And another point they made was the fact that many people are made aware of a particular podcast simply by word of mouth. So the conversation that we just had here made me aware of 2 podcasts I had never heard of before. So hopefully people will spread the word about our podcast, and we'll get more listeners. Another point I wanted to make about your comment, Mike, with the West Wing podcast is
West Wing Weekly.
West Wing's not on TV anymore, correct?
Oh, no.
Right? So
sad.
In the list of the top 10 podcasts that I found for teachers, I was interested in the fact that 2 of them are actually old. One, #NerdyCast, hasn't had any new episodes since 2015, but it's on this list because it features, in this author's opinion, the smartest and funniest people in education. They talk about education, technology, and pop culture. So I thought that was really cool. And another one, A History of the World in 100 Objects, hasn't had an episode since 2010.
Did they hit their 100 objects?
Yes, it's the same 100 objects, but it retells humans' history through the objects we have made. So that's never going to change. But it's a great resource for a history teacher.
And I think that last little bit that you just said, like, great resource for a history teacher, like, there's so many podcasts out there. Like, that's why I have up on my computer right now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different sets of lists. And all the lists are different podcasts of different whatever you're looking for, whether it's science, whether it's history, whether it's English, whether it's math. Yes, there are math podcasts out there, or foreign language. Like, there's just so many. Like, NPR has a bunch of great podcasts that they do. There's one newer one that I'm listening to, which is called Love and Money, which is talking about how it's important to have, for good marriages, to have like a balance of, you need to talk about money or else it's going to be a huge negative in there. So like, there's ways to like just improve yourselves too. And whether it's improving your students' learning by using something like Science Friday or Wow in the World or Science Mike, to using, I did have these all up there, or something like The Radio Adventures of Dr. Floyd, which is like a good guy, bad guy, but taking all the things from history and trying to like stop them from happening, or like how would you do it yourself? So there's just so many. I mean, that's what's great about it. That's what's great about this medium.
Right. And one thing we haven't mentioned, probably because we feel that it's so obvious, is the fact that all these podcasts are free. You can subscribe and then automatically be alerted to new episodes that are out there, but you don't have to pay anything, which is really great.
For this week's interview of the week, it was with Lindsey Lindequist. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, because as of right now, when we are recording this, central office has no internet, so I can't go on and look to make sure that I am pronouncing Lindsey's last name correctly. But we had a great time interviewing her, so go ahead and take a listen.
We're at Gerena, and I have been here 11 years, which is as long as I've been teaching, so I've only taught here. I've taught a whole bunch of grades here, including multi-age for second, third, mostly third grade, and now I am the Math ILS.
Wow, so 11 years all in the same building. That seems very rare these days. Early on in teaching, what were some of the technology tools that you used in the classroom?
Probably the first thing I had was a smart board that was with a projector that was detached, and the cord had to go around the kids, and you couldn't move the cart because if the cart moved, then the smart board was no longer working properly. And then kind of an old school document camera. That was the beginning, and it was really hard to it was good to use. It felt really new, but it was hard to use in this space. Also, Gerena has it's a pod system, so it's kind of hard to find places to put technology, especially permanent technology, because things are always moving, including the walls between your classroom. So those were kind of the first main things that we used for technology.
So early on with using the smart board, what were some of the activities that you did with students?
Early on, I really used it like a projector, just to kind of project a document or something on my computer, but very basic, just to almost like just a Jumbotron to see what I was doing instead. And then once I looked more into Smart Notebook itself, I started doing more with the activities themselves and sorts and various games and things that we could do on the smart board.
So one of the things you mentioned was teaching many grades in your time as a teacher before you became the ILS. How did you differentiate how you use technology with the different grades?
I think that in the beginning, when we started using technology in the classroom more often, we had this feeling, I think, that younger kids were going to have a harder time and older kids were going to have an easier time with it. And I think over time we've learned that that's not really the case, that the kids are really, really savvy with technology in general. But I think that in first grade, there's a lot more of walking back and forth to the board and doing more things like interacting with the smart board itself. Whereas in the upper grades, third, fourth, and fifth now, they have their laptops with them and they're doing a lot more independently. They're typing, they're getting on websites, and they are so much better at it than I think we give them credit for. I think at the beginning, teachers, including myself, were kind of, how are we going to do this? It's going to be hard for them to get on. How are they going to get on Brightspace? How are they going to take an assessment online or find this game? But they are much better than we give them credit for, I think.
Going from classroom teacher to ILS, what are some of the ways that you use technology now?
My biggest thing that I've just kind of finished was digitizing kind of all of tutoring. So we do extended learning before and after school to prepare for MCAS. And because 4th and 5th grade, we're taking it on the computer, I didn't think we could use paper worksheets or paper to do the tutoring. I spent a ton of time putting everything from a workbook type place to online. So I did OneNote, so the entire tutoring took place either on OneNote, where the tutors interacted with the OneNote, and then students took assessments on Edulastic as their kind of their independent practice. So that's been a huge thing. And also as an ILS, a big change for me has been looking for new technology and teaching teachers about how to use that technology.
So with tutoring, I'm going to start there. Are you guys also a take-home school so students can take the tutoring home with them, or do they sit here and do it too?
So we are a take-home school, but we have not gotten to that point of the tutoring yet. That's a fabulous idea, though. I will take you up on. I will take that for next year. Yeah. So there still is a teacher that's teaching the lesson initially, and the students are interacting with the OneNote on a smartboard. They weren't interacting with the OneNote themselves at that point. They do for different parts of the day, but not for that particular part. And then they would be on a computer to do the Edulastic part. And so a lot of the kids who were participating in tutoring had their computers with them anyway, because most of our 5th grade and 4th grade take home their computers. We were in places with, laptop carts if we needed them. So
okay. So with tutoring, you said you digitized it into OneNote. So can you explain why and the process that you did for that?
So the reason I did it was because it seemed the kind of most comprehensive, the easiest way to take what we had done previously in like a workbook type thing and make it into something that a teacher could interact with. I wanted teachers to be able to prove to students that, but show them how to go from a computer to a piece of scrap paper back to a computer, because that I think is the hardest change that we're going through, especially for math. If you think everything has to be computed on a paper and then put correctly back without changing numbers or a decimal point or whatever. My goal was to have the main focus of tutoring be teachers showing students some ways to do that, the easiest way to organize yourself as you're solving. I took some of the old math problems that we did, and we used the explicit instruction model, the IWU. So the tutor had a section was the day of the tutoring, and then each page was the I do, the we do, and the you do. And then I put all the assessment questions on Edulastic. So the kids would then go into Edulastic and actually do the work. Put to practice the use of going from the scrap paper to a computer and back, practice just the accuracy and the typing of their answer without being able to show the equation that they have on their scrap paper, because that I think is the hardest change, the hardest thing for them.
With doing tutoring this way, and I know we're not going to see the MCAS results till later this year, anecdotally, have you seen a change or seen an uptick in ability in the students, or has it kind of been stagnant?
It's kind of hard to tell right now, but I think there's a lot more kids realizing that they have to do the work on a paper. And at least I tutor personally 5th grade in the afternoons, and they've gotten much better at organizing their scrap paper, and they've gotten much better at realizing they actually have to use a piece of scrap paper. We've had kids that, for an ANET, for example, will stare at 5 decimals and think that they can compare them and order them by just staring at the screen. You can't do that. No. Especially talking to them about how they must, in fact, take what's on the computer, copy parts of it to the paper, and then put it back. So at least the kids that I've been working with, I've seen a big difference. In the 5th grade class that I do my 20% in, they do a lot of OneNote as well, and they have a notebook with them where they're transferring back and forth.
So as an ILS, you mentioned that, I'm going to jump around now.
That's fine.
You mentioned that you go out and you look for different programs and things to bring to teachers to use. I believe you mentioned Seesaw and Edulastic. What are some other things that you've done?
Well, so the beginning of this year for PD, as you might remember, was all different kinds of technology, and so we, the 2 other ELA ILSs and I, put together the PD of ways for them to just really practice using this. So we talked about Pear Deck a lot. We did Cahoots. We did Songbird was in there. So a lot of it was something the district had kind of provided us with some ideas, and then we tried to create PD where teachers interacted with this technology and then had to tell their colleagues about it on a platform of technology. A group would look at Pear Deck maybe, and then on Seesaw they would have to explain what Pear Deck is. And so we tried to kind of make it interactive with teachers. We've done a ton with the OneDrive this year, 365, because it's an easy way to share everything, which has had its positives and negatives, because you have to remind people that a shared document, if it gets changed, it's changed. It's forever changed. We've done a lot with that. We did a lot of the ability to interact with documents on 365. We did a PD where everyone was editing one PowerPoint to then create a school-wide PowerPoint on the MCAS scores. And that was really powerful because we could all do it all on the same platform at the same time. It was instantaneous, which is nice.
Yes. With that training and all these different programs, and being an ILS, so that means you get to go into classrooms a lot. Have you seen some programs take off more than others? Like you see more teachers use Pear Deck instead of Seesaw, or use Edulastic instead of something else.
Something else. I think that the biggest things that have taken off this year are OneNote. Astoria is a subscription that we have that especially the upper grades love. I think Seesaw started to take off a little bit. People loved it during the PD, but there are some sign-in issues and some kind of way that kids interact with it. Some of that technology is not super easy for groupings. Like to have a group of kids submit something on Seesaw is a little challenging. And I think that teachers are willing to troubleshoot just so far before they're just like, all right, we're going to do something else. And so Edulastic is just starting to be something that people are interested in because we really just kind of discovered it and have started using it. Clickers has always been something that people have liked and gone back to, as well as Kahoot, because the kids love Kahoot. They love the challenge of trying to do something quickly and do something and beat people, basically.
What are some things that you're looking forward to trying next year with your staff?
I was actually just talking about this with the other ILSs and my principal. We're thinking about ordering supplies for next year and kind of how much paper are we going to need? How many notebooks are we going to need? And I'm kind of hoping that we're not going to need that many. We're going to be doing some more with OneNote, more with Microsoft, with 365 and the Microsoft tools, because our kids are going to be doing so much on the computer that we won't be needing that as much. So I'm really looking forward to trying to get third grade digitized and get them kind of going and working. I really like Edulastic as a tool. I think it's a really good formative assessment. And I also am kind of excited to spend the summer looking for more technology, because there's something, I know there's something new coming out all the time for classrooms.
And so now our final question. If you had the opportunity to stand in front of all the new hires in the district, so there is a new hire meeting at the very beginning of the year, and then they do another series. I just did a presentation with them a couple days ago. If you had the chance to stand in front of them and offer any advice, whether it be technology or not, what would you say to them?
I think that if I had something to say, I would tell teachers to find a really positive person in their building, made them feel happy and well taken care of, and to stick with that person.
Well, thank you again for your time. I know this is a busy Friday during the middle of MCAS month, and so thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you again, Lindsey Lindequist of Gerena, our Math ILS that we spoke to there. All the great, amazing things that she's doing in the classroom when she's with the students, and the things that she's observing with other teachers in her building are amazing, and we are so glad that we got to get a peek into life at Gerena. With that, I just want to again remind you that if you know of someone who should be interviewed for the podcast, or you are doing something amazing, please let us know. We'd love to come out to you, or you can come to us, especially during the summertime. It's much quieter around everywhere. So we'd love to interview you then, so that in the first few weeks of school, we're not running around trying to find interviews of everybody to be a part of the podcast. And it allows you to get settled into your new classroom. With a lot of the changes that are coming up in the next couple of years, I really hope you tune in next week to our season finale of SPS Digital Learning Hour. as we interview Paul Foster and we talk about some of the new tech software that is coming down the pipes this summer and beyond. So I'm your host, Mike Thomas, and I will see you next week.